And it's that time of the day when we take a look at the political landscape, both here at home and abroad. We're tracking all of those big political stories that you need to know about with some fresh analysis from our experts. And this morning, we are looking at the City of Cape Town's amended bylaws for public spaces. The Women's Legal Centre has rejected the city's draft amendments of the Streets, Public Spaces and Prevention of Noise bylaw, saying the amendments are unconstitutional and irrational. The proposed amendments want the power to arrest without a warrant, enter any private property also without a warrant, seize any property also without a warrant, including your home. Public comments closed yesterday, and for more on the story now, we're joined on the line by Siham Samai, who is the director of the Women's Legal Centre, which has made written submissions on this issue. Siham, thanks very much for your time on the AM report. So it's also known as the nuisance bylaw. The question is, nuisance to whom?
Yes, thank you firstly for having the Women's Legal Centre. It's nuisance. I mean, I think we need to first contextualize this. That it's undisputed that the Western Cape government, at least, has inherited a spatial planning that is very unequal. But the challenge that we're sitting with in the Western Cape is that the Western Cape government, as well as local government, has perpetuated or continued to drive itself spatial segregation. So when we see it within that particular context, we can see that this published draft amendment, which came out on the 17th of April and just gave people 1 month to comment, a bylaw or amendment that has got far-reaching consequences for the poor as well as working class. Because we all know that the current 2007 nuisance bylaw is an anti-poor piece of legislation. And for more than 10 years, that piece of legislation has been consistently challenged by various organizations in civil society. So on top of the existing 2007 bylaw, the City of Cape Town now wants to bring in additional amendments to so-called streamline not the implication, but the implementation of the 2007 bylaw. And I think that is where we have a major challenge. And as I said before, it's an anti-poor piece of amendment, and it's got far-reaching consequences for the poor as well as the working class.
No, absolutely. And you talk about the spatial segregation that exists in the Western Cape, in the City of Cape Town in particular, and by the sounds of things and the analysis that I've read on these amendments, they are constitutionally suspect, to say the least. For example, there's this issue around homeless people living in wealthier suburbs. Law enforcement under these bylaws can instruct a person to leave and remain out of that suburb. Am I hearing echoes from our apartheid past here and the past laws?
Well, that is exactly the implementation of this particular piece of the 2007 bylaw, as well as the current amendment, will exactly have that particular effect. Because what it does, if you look at the 2007 bylaw and also the existing offences. Now, let me give you an example of some of the offences. It is when you are hanging, for example, clothing on a boundary wall, or it faces a public hall, a public road. So we know, I mean, on the Cape Flat, on most of our impoverished areas, where do people hang their clothes, for example? Then we also have, it is what we call the criminalization of poverty. It is when people urinate, when people fall asleep, when they sleep, it relates to parking, etc. And who does that actually impact? It impacts the poor and the working class, it impacts on the homeless, and it impacts on the voiceless. And I think it's very important that when laws are brought in, that we need to be able to take into account the lived realities of the poor, as well as women, black women, as well as those that live within the city centre, but is not actually welcome in the city centre.
I mean, what it sounds like is that these amendments are made with the view that all people living in Cape Town live in gated communities or in a big house with a garden where you can hang your washing on a line in that big garden.
Yes. What it does is that, and this is not just the current amendment, the 2007 bylaw in itself, that ensures that people are actually, I would say the poor as the working class is actually pushed out of the periphery of the city. And the bylaws in itself facilitates gentrification. And I think we need to be able to see this within this broader context, because you have a local government that brings in bylaws and amendments during a time in our country where we are under lockdown. We are currently under stage 4. This particular amendment's got some serious impact on the civil liberties or civil participation rights of citizens as well as civil society. And they decide to give 1 month and to bring in this bylaw during this particular period when people are concerned about the basic needs, about health, about survival, about food, about education. And they decide to bring in this piece of controversial piece of amendment. And I think that in itself is telling for a city that is not really concerned about the poor. They're not really concerned about those that have been challenged by COVID. The Western Cape is the epicenter of COVID, and the Western Cape local government as well as government, provincial government, has to be able to look at these challenges rather than bringing in a piece of amendment that will further push the poor and the working class out of the city centre. This piece of bylaw will also give them more rights, for example, to inspect, to search without a warrant. And one of the things that we have challenged was that the law enforcement of the city of Cape Town already have existing search and certain seizure rights. Why does the city, at the end of the day, want additional rights? And these rights is currently within the Criminal Procedure Act. So the question is, what is the purpose of this particular bylaw or this particular amendment?
No, absolutely. And I think one could very easily argue that these amendments go as far as to target the most vulnerable among us. I'm talking about the homeless. And the High Court in the Western Cape last year already called into question these bylaws and their constitutionality. Are there now new plans to take these amendments on review? Is the Women's Legal Centre a part of that?
Well, the Women's Legal Centre forms part also of a broader coalition of organizations that is pushing for various amendments, but also an alliance that ensures that the city understands its anti-poor agenda when it comes to this particular bylaws. In addition to that, we will also, obviously there is an entire process that needs to be followed. This is what they call the so-called public participation process. Thereafter, the city of Cape Town will have to say what is going to, it will have to go through the council, etc. But we do know that there has been hundreds of civic organizations, community-based organizations, civil society, as well as progressive lawyer organizations like the National Association of Democratic Lawyers have all made submissions to be able to say that this piece of this bylaw or this particular amendment is premature, and that they must take into account that it's done during a period when our country is under lockdown. In addition to that, those organizations have also indicated it's unconstitutional and it's irrational and it's anti-poor.
Siham Samai, thanks very much for weighing in on this incredibly important topic. Siham Samai is the director of the Women's Legal Centre as we continue to track this story around the City of Cape Town's so-called nuisance bylaw, which has been criticised as being anti-poor.